Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I caught not only the word poach, but I also caught the word immigration to Canada. Let me assure you that the elephant is also a species that migrates a lot. It's also very fond of issues relating to immigration and immigration, and that causes a lot of problems too. Just as I'm sure it's doing for many of you here, because I know in my circle of family and friends, there are people wanting to desperately to, go to some other country and they're not able to. But nevertheless, that's an issue that I'll bring up in the course of my talk. Let me start sharing my screen and this term foodie is something that I had not heard of until fairly recently. A year ago that I heard the term foodie. I'm sure that maybe the same with some of you at least, I hope. This is a word that is often used by the younger generation, and sometimes when you refer to something, they say, oh, I'm a foodie, or so-and-so is a foodie. And then one day I thought to myself that perhaps I can use the same term to describe the elephant also. That was the genesis of the title of this talk. So foodie is is somebody who is is extremely fond of food or certain types of foods or whatever, and so that's where the wit is perhaps in when we talk about elephants. But if you actually reflect upon it more closely, you'll realize that at the ground, when elephants interact very intensely with people, with agriculturalists and with farmers, it is no wit at all, actually. It's a lot of hardship for people. And let me take you through this story. Okay. Essentially, when you talk about elephants and you look at their feeding habits, elephants feed on almost everything. They can feed on leaves, they can feed on fruits, they can feed on bark. You can see on the lower left of the screen, an elephant is stripping the bark of a tree. On the bottom right, you see an African elephant that's pulling a root. It's pulling out the root of a plant and it's feeding on it. It feeds on, a pith of a banana. It feeds on practically anything you give it, the elephant feeds upon it. But at the same time, the elephant can also be extremely choosy. So you may all have seen this plant, touch me not, Mimosa pudica, which is got this very tiny pink flowers. So the elephant can actually pick up an individual flower, which is so tiny. It's probably about ½ a centimeter in diameter. And with the tip of its tongue, it can selectively, pluck out an individual flower of touch-me-not and feed on it. So see, what defines the elephant is its nose, essentially. It's got such a long nose, and with whatever millions of receptors for smell and so on and so forth. And it's also got, the trunk is also extremely powerful and versatile. So it can actually use this for, for any number of different functions. And in fact, if you go back to the Rig Veda talks about three types of animals that have the use of a hand. So one is humans, the second is the ape, and the third is the elephant. Okay, so it's not surprising that ancient people thought that the trunk of an elephant is like a hand. And I can't think of any other creatures that actually have such a versatile organ. Now, elephants also, as I told you, sometimes are choosy, sometimes are not, but they frequent garbage dumps, unfortunately. This happens, this is a picture from Sri Lanka. And there's a garbage dump on the outskirts of some town where the elephants are coming and, picking up the morsels that we have thrown. This also, unfortunately, happens in parts of India, like Gudalur, for instance. And this must be happening, must be quite widespread now. All these are wild elephants. These are not captive elephants. And elephants are fond of fruits and they get drunk. So you see the picture below. If you pass through one of the African airports, you can pick up a bottle of marula wine. And the marula, it's made from the marula fruit. You can see the elephant, the African elephant below. It's taking this tree and it eats a lot of these fruit. And in the bottom right, you see this elephant actually literally drunk, and because the fruit is fermenting and producing alcohol in its digestive system. So, but what really matters to millions of people today in India, in Sri Lanka, in many other countries, is that elephants raid agricultural crops. This gives rise to a lot of very witty comments sometimes, but it's really no fun for an average farmer, whose crops have been devastated by wild elephants. These are scenes from Central India. They are from East Central India, from states like Southern Bengal, West Bengal, and from Odisha, Jharkhand. And you see a paddy crop on the paddy field on the top picture, in which a herd of elephant is feeding on it. Now, much has been written about the enormous quantities of food that an elephant requires. Okay, so you talk to anyone, and an average person will say, "Oh, but the elephant is very large; it requires a huge amount of quantity of food." And for a full-grown male, the typical figure put out is 300 kilos of fresh weight of plant material every day. However, the quantity is not large when related to its body size. See, normally in a popular talk like this, I am very reluctant to put out scientific figures or tables, but I know that you're all bankers and you understand numbers probably much better than I do. Therefore, I was tempted. I thought I'll just put this up. This is a logarithmic scale. The body mass is a logarithmic scale on the x-axis, and the metabolic rate. So you can see that something like this very, very small, a small animal has got a very high metabolic rate. It needs to eat its own body weight, or maybe 2 times or multiple times of its body weight every day. On the other hand, the elephant is a very, very low metabolic rate because of the low surface to volume ratio, and therefore it only needs to take about 8% of its body weight each day as fresh fodder, or 2% of its body weight as dry fodder. So what the elephant eats, it needs a lot in absolute terms, but not in proportionate terms when you consider the body weight of the elephant. And that's the only graph that I will test you with. I will not test you with any other graph. Okay. Now, African elephants, if you go to Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, you go to these savanna areas, Masai Mara, Serengeti, and Amboseli. This is I've taken this picture in Amboseli in Kenya. You'll see them feeding on grass. Okay. There are these vast plains, and you will think that the elephant is a grazer. Now, you go to Sri Lanka, and you go to places like Mineria, which is in central part of Sri Lanka. This is again, you have open grassy plains like this, meadows like this, and very often you can go and you can see for hours together the elephants are feeding upon grass. So there is a temptation to label the elephant as a grazer, as opposed to, and let me explain what's meant by grazer. Grazer is an animal that feeds essentially on grasses or herbaceous plants, essentially on the ground. Okay. A browser is the other term that we use, refers to feeding on all other types of plant parts. Leaves of trees and shrubs and bark and fruit and all that is called browsing. And in common parlance in biology, we call grazing when it's feeding on grass. Okay. So if you go to Africa, the buffalo is a grazer, the zebra is largely a grazer, and so on. The giraffe is a browser. The giraffe with its long neck, it feeds selectively on the leaves of on acacia trees. So it's a browser. But notice the forest in the background. So when I started my studies about 40 years ago, I realized that, people are putting out all these research papers in which they claim that elephants are grazers, especially Indian elephants. But then you find forests, and all the biologists also, what they do, they go and park themselves in a vehicle, in a jeep right next to an open area like this, where the elephants are visible. And then lo and behold, what you see elephants feeding on grass. Okay. Now, if you were to venture into the forest, which is risky for various reasons, from elephants and from tigers and sloth bears and all other kinds of creatures, it's not very easy to follow elephants in dense forests like this. You will feel that elephants also then feed on a wide variety of other plants and plant parts. So here the elephant is feeding on bamboo, And earlier I showed you elephants feeding on leaves and bark and so on and so forth. So the elephant is also a browser. And interestingly, again, I'll not go into the scientific aspects of this. I used a technique called stable carbon isotopes. So this has something to do with the, the isotopes that you see in carbon dioxide is something called 12 carbon, if you read electrical chemistry. But there's a heavier isotope called 13 carbon. And there are different, the grasses and the browse plants, they have different types of ratios, amounts of this 13 carbon. So I use that to trace the diet in an elephant. And I found that substantial amount of the protein that contributes to the nutrition of an elephant comes from browse, from bamboos and from leaves and bark and so on, not necessarily from the grass. Okay, so I will not again get into technical details about this. But then let me come to the main theme of my talk, and that is that elephant-human conflicts are escalating. By conflicts, I mean loss of agricultural crop, and on the right side you see a paddy field, and you see the elephant dung there. And it doesn't leave much to the imagination. You see a lot of trampled crop. Some of it is eaten, but 60–70% of it is actually wasted. And crores of rupees worth of crops are damaged each year, in India alone. I don't really think there's a real estimate, but it will go into tens or hundreds of crores of rupees worth agricultural crops damaged. When I began my research on elephants for more than 40 years ago, I compiled statistics that indicated about 125 people were killed by wild elephants, especially farmers guarding their crops. And sometimes when people go into the forest for collecting firewood, or a villager walking from one village to another village through the forest. See, when we all go to these forests on safaris, we have the luxury of going in a safari jeep or in our own cars. And the average villager in India does not have this luxury. They have to walk. They have to go and collect firewood to cook their evening meals. And they get killed by a wild elephant. But very often, when farmers keep guard over their crop fields at night, that's when the elephants come to the crop fields. Farmers try to chase the elephants and they get killed. But today, it has gone up fourfold. More than 500 people each year are killed by wild elephants. So the problem in the last 40 years has escalated fourfold. And even if we are to begin today to try to scale this back, to take it to a baseline, it is going to be a tremendous task for various reasons, which I will discuss towards the end of my talk. Okay, elephants also break into houses to take stored grain or sometimes cooked food. And on the top right, you see an unfortunate person. This is in Jharkhand, who has been killed by a wild elephant. Okay, now elephants also can pay a cost in the course of this conflict. It's not only that they get a lot of benefit from feeding on crops, but they also incur cost. And in the south alone, about 40 to 50 elephants are killed each year. Typically, when the farmer runs a electric wire around the farm. Okay, now these electric wires should ideally be powered by a pulsed current, a high voltage pulsed current with a gap. So every second you give a millisecond current of a pulse of something like 8,000 or 10,000 volts. But sometimes farmers don't do that, and they connect the wire to the mains, about 230, 240 volts, and any living creature coming into contact with it, is killed by it. And on the other hand, elephants may also be seriously injured in the course of crop breeding. And you must have known of this case in Kerala where an elephant bit into a jackfruit in which explosive chemicals had been kept, and the lower jaw received a lot of injuries, and the elephant died in the process. It created a huge furor in the country last year. So there are certain risks that the elephants take in raiding crops. So the question as a biologist that we ask is, why do you take so many risks? When you can be chased by farmers, you can be harassed by farmers, you can be injured, and you can die in the process. Okay, here again, I bring the analogy of a banker. All of you, being banks, would have lended a lot of money to the corporates, and hopefully would have assessed the risks of, lending huge amounts of money to the corporates. And you expect that you will get more benefits than the risks that you take, and therefore, all your rates and so on are presumably set in the context of the risks that you take. So the same thing the elephant is also doing. The elephant is a rational animal. It is doing a benefit-cost ratio, when it goes out and breaks crops. Scenes like this have become very common. Of course, they appear very cute to us. This is the town of Siliguri in Bengal, West Bengal. And how many people are from Bengal here, but these Bengali elephants are really very, very special. The I put up on the first opening slide was also an elephant in West Bengal. This is in the town of Siliguri, a shopping complex. A tuskless male elephant has come to join the party. And it's having a great time, kicking all the two-wheelers and so on. And from the shopping complex, the people are watching the elephant. The real miracle in this incident was that this elephant did not injure a single human being, but went back to the forest. But that doesn't always happen. This is somewhat more common and closer to home, the Bangalore-Chennai highway. This crossing occurs near a place called Sannamagu, between Hosur and Krishnagiri, sometimes during the daytime, sometimes at night. This kind of movement was not there 40 years ago. This began almost exactly about 37, 38 years ago, during 1983, when elephants from the Hosur forest area, Bannerkatta Hosur forest area, started now moving into Andhra, the Chittoor area of Andhra. Now, in recent years, you will find a lot of news stories about elephants in Andhra killing people, ravaging crops, and so on. So this is a process that started in 1983. This followed a very severe drought in southern India. Many of you all will remember that 1982 was a year of highly deficit rainfall in southern India. So a year when you had a phenomenon called El Nino. El Nino is the warming of the Pacific Ocean. When this happens, the southern hemisphere receives less rainfall and southern India also receives less rainfall. These El Ninos happen every 5 or 6 years or 10 years or so. Now, 82 was one of the most serious El Ninos that caused a major drought in southern India. And these elephants left, and just like immigration. Okay, this is immigration to, just like we immigrate to USA and Canada, as I heard in the beginning, I kind of got a bit of the conversation. So elephants also like to immigrate, and they are looking for, better pastures to feed upon. So they left Tamil Nadu. They said, okay, I can't earn my living here. I'm going to go and explore the world elsewhere. And they went northward. They've never been there in the last 300 or 400 years, but they ventured there. And they found a lot of crops, agricultural crops they could feed upon. And then they said, okay, let's try to settle down there. Okay. That's another story. But most of these dispersals or immigrations, they don't succeed, they fail. And they cause a lot of pain because people do not know, the farmers have never seen elephants before. And against the grain of scientific advice, the government wanted to welcome the elephants and keep the elephants. They thought Lord Ganesha had come to the state after hundreds of years. So let's welcome the elephants. But, it cost, a lot of human lives and pain. Now, this conflict is not necessarily new. Elephants and humans are co-evolved. Sometimes we think that elephants came first and humans came last, or tigers came first and humans came later and intruded into the tiger habitat. A lot of this does not have any scientific basis at all. We are co-evolved creatures. And the best example of co-evolution is that of elephants and humans and modern humans. This is a sculpture that I discovered in Udayagiri caves in Odisha, very close to Bhubaneswar. Okay. Got some remarkable sculpture. Here you see wild elephants. This is just a short snapshot of a part of the sculpture. You see a herd of elephants being confronted. You see the raised arm of the people. And interestingly, you see that it's the women that seem to be leading this charge against the wild elephants, indicating that the women guarded the fields 2,000 years ago. This was a Jain period in the state of Odisha. You find all these Jain cut caves and Udayagiri and Kandagiri. And, it's a remarkable sculpture. This is the earliest sculpture that I can find of what I call a depiction of elephant-human conflict. 2,000 years old. But then you can go back to our literature. You all must have heard of the Gajasastra. And the Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjavur actually has the original manuscript of the Gajasastra. And it opens with this sentence: Romapada, the king of Anga, Anga is of course present-day Bihar, was seated on a throne when people reported to him that all the crops of grain were being destroyed by wild elephants. Okay, so that is a allusion to wild elephants coming and raiding crops in the kingdom of Anga in the state of Bihar, the present-day state of Bihar, and the sage Palkapya, probably came from the northeast, came from Assam, and this elephant lore is from the 5th century BCE, before the Common Era. And then you come to the Tamil Sangam poems, again close to 2000 years ago, and you find a lot of poems talking about the male elephants raiding the millet fields at night, and how the farmers keep guard from platforms, on a tree, and they get tired of these elephants after some time, and then they fall asleep. They have a drink of arak or whatever that they prepared in the old days, and they go to sleep. Almost precisely what you find today. For 2000 years, nothing much has changed in the Tamil land. Exactly the same kinds of scenes play out in the hill forests and in the villages. Now, we need to have a good understanding, fundamental understanding of what causes conflict. This is where, unfortunately, what has happened today is that pop science and pop media, social media has kind of taken over in the narrative. This narrative will tell you that, humans have intruded into the elephant forests. We have caused loss of habitat and fragmentation, degradation of habitat. And that's the reason that the elephants don't have enough forage inside the forest. Therefore, they're coming out and raiding crops. Yes, there is a big grain of truth in that, certainly. But the story does not stop there. It's a far more complex story. And I'll try to explain that in the next 15-20 minutes. We have habitat loss and fragmentation, degradation. We have changes in land use patterns. We have adverse climatic events that are responsible for some of this conflict. We have elephant and human population increase, which a lot of people, especially with elephant population increase, refuse to believe that elephant populations are increasing. They only think that human populations are increasing. But we need to go into the behavior of the behavioral ecology of elephants, the feeding ecology of elephants, the fundamental behavioral ecology of elephants and how males and females behave differently for certain biological reasons. Then you have this complex process of learning and culture among elephants, not only among humans, but elephants also have culture and a process of learning, including learning habits like crop raiding. It's certainly true, you go to Southeast Asia, you go to Malaysia and Indonesia, some parts of India, you have huge clearing of rainforest like this and replaced with oil palm. Now, oil palm is also going to come into India, and I don't know what type of land it's going to replace, land use it's going to replace, but you get a clearing of the forest. The elephants were there earlier, and they, of course, continue to come into this land. And palm is a suitable food for elephants, and therefore they continue to feed on the palm. So you have conflict. But then you go to central India. This picture is taken, I think, in Jharkhand. Odisha also has large areas like this. Iron ore mining, coal mining, manganese mining, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand. Huge areas that are bereft of any kind of vegetation. And therefore, the elephants have nothing to feed upon. This really causes fragmentation of habitat. This is a satellite image. I don't know how many of you have been, during your tenures have been posted in any of these states. This is the Keonjhar district in Odisha. You see all those brown areas which are mining areas. The mining area may only be a fraction of the total forest area, but it is kind of penetrated in a haphazard manner, causing huge disturbance. And the elephants cannot maneuver or move around these areas, and they can't move through these areas, so they have to move around these areas. And in the process, there is a lot of conflict. Elephants die in the process. Yes, so we have caused enormous disturbance in certain types of forest, but that does not explain it all. Okay, we have tea gardens in South India, in Assam. This has caused loss of habitat, but elephants can move through these areas. We have created dams and reservoirs, but elephants can swim across these. It is loss of habitat, but the elephants can swim across these habitats. But they have lost forage ground. But when it comes to degradation of habitat, there's something fundamental we need to understand. We need to look at degradation through an elephant's eyes and not through our eyes. When a forest is cut, we think the habitat is degraded. Yes, from our viewpoint, the habitat is degraded. But, you might be surprised to know that elephants actually like forests that are cut. Okay, they don't like a pristine forest with huge towering trees and so on. When a forest is logged, you have a lot of plants like grasses and bamboos that invade this forest. And elephants actually like these type of plants. They get more food here. So the carrying capacity of such what we call a secondary forest or a disturbed forest is higher than that of an intact forest. But therefore, degradation of forests should be viewed as those where the resource gap between these and the natural forest is increased. So a picture on the bottom picture is from Attapadi in Kerala, in the southern part of the Nilgiris. So there it can't feed, there's nothing to feed upon. So that is degraded, but not the central picture where the forest is logged, but the elephant actually likes this area and actually responds to it by coming in larger numbers and abundance to feed on whatever grasses and bamboos that grow there. In the last 20 years, a highly invasive plant, Lantana camara, some of you may have seen this. You find this in, if you have a plot of land which you have not used in the city, you might find this very attractive flowers. This came from Central America about 200 years ago. They don't like a pristine forest with huge towering trees and so on. When a forest is logged, you have a lot of plants like grasses and bamboos that invade this forest. And elephants actually like these type of plants. They get more food here. So the carrying capacity of such what we call a secondary forest or a disturbed forest is higher than that of an intact forest. But therefore, degradation of forests should be viewed as those where the resource gap between these and the natural forest is increased. So a picture on the bottom picture is from Attapadi in Kerala, in the southern part of the Nilgiris. So there it can't feed, there's nothing to feed upon. So that is degraded, but not the central picture where the forest is logged, but the elephant actually likes this area and actually responds to it by coming in larger numbers and abundance to feed on whatever grasses and bamboos that grow there. In the last 20 years, a highly invasive plant, Lantana camara, some of you may have seen this. You find this in, if you have a plot of land which you have not used in the city, you might find this very attractive flowers. This came from Central America about 200 years ago. The last 20 years, it has spread wildly in the southern Indian forest. It has excluded all the grasses that the elephants feed upon. So, this is highly degrading to the elephants. Forests are degraded because of this. We also have a lot of complex land use change. This is what I call the pull factor. See, the push factor, when the habitat is degraded, there is the push factor operating. The elephants are pushed out of the forest. But then there is something attractive outside the forest that is pulling the elephants, that is attracting the attention of the elephants. And this is land use change outside the forest. With all the irrigation, the canals, the dams that we have built, India is greening outside the forest, more outside the forest than inside the forest. We are creating a lot of tanks, ponds, small dams. Farmers are getting more water for agriculture. And all this means that agriculture is thriving outside the forest. So this is the pull factor, the factor that attracts the attention of the elephant and is drawing the elephants. Okay, even if the elephants have enough food inside, the natural food, so-called natural food, we are now creating the supermarkets outside and increasingly the elephants are going out. So it's a complex suite of factors that are operating. And we cannot reduce everything to one or two simple factors, or the elephants have no food inside the forest and so on. Now, I mentioned this big dispersal from South India in 1982-83 when we had a big drought. Elephants went to Andhra. Similar thing happened in 87. Elephants from Jharkhand started going into South Bengal. Very, very serious conflicts that started happening. So today we are living in the era of climate change. You can expect increased frequency of droughts. So all this would mean that the elephants will now start showing very complex migration patterns. And there could be increase in conflicts. And in fact, what has happened is there is a special issue of the magazine Down to Earth. You will find in the bottom left. The bottom right is the original range of the elephant about 20 years ago. But then the bottom left, you see a lot of yellow. I hope you can see it on your screens. These are the ranges where the elephants are expanding now. So elephants are expanding their range. The elephant range is not contracting the last 20 or 30 years. In fact, in places like Karnataka, in places like Hassan and Kodagu and so on, the elephants are expanding their range into the coffee plantations. But finally, when you look at the benefits that the elephants are getting, you have to go back to what I call foraging theory. Elephants are very choosy. If an elephant comes out into a crop field at night and feeds on crops, it can eat up to 12 kilos per hour. In the natural habitat, the elephants can feed only up to 6 kilos per hour of grasses. It comes out into a paddy field or a ragi field, it can feed up to 12 kilos per hour. So why should an elephant have to feed for very long time periods during the daytime? By spending half the amount of time, the elephant can get its forage requirement for the day by feeding the crops at night and spend the rest of the time in doing other activities, socializing, for instance. Okay, so this is optimal, so the elephants, all that the elephants are doing is they are exercising optimal foraging. And then at the same time, I found that the cultivated crops like ragi and maize and paddy, they provide, this goes back to my early work, it provides superior nutrition in the form of protein and sodium and calcium. You will find that these nutritive values are two times, 3 times, 4 times that of the wild grasses. So therefore, as long as we cultivate crops that are more abundant, tasty, and nutritious, they will continue to lure elephants. And therefore, irrespective of whether elephants have food inside the forest or not, they will continue to come outside and they'll continue to raid crops. And of course, another big attractant is alcohol. It's not just humans who like alcohol, the elephants also like to have their, and these are not taken in small pegs, by the way, they're taken in barrels. And very often, in rural areas, people, distill country-made liquor and keep them in barrels inside. How does the elephants come and break down the walls? People get killed. The elephants have their fill and they get quite drunk, by the way. Now look at this elephant in a coffee plantation. Look at how well built she is. Look at her body condition. Wonderful body condition. This elephant is about 40 to 50 years of age. She is in excellent body condition. She's outside the forest area. She's largely roaming inside a coffee plantation. Many of you may have been to Bandipur National Park or Nagarhode and places like that. Look at this female elephant, approximately the same. Look at her body condition. Okay. Yeah. So this is the natural body condition of elephants that are ranging inside a protected forest area. Very often people think that elephants need protected forests. This is what they get inside a protected forest. My student did a PhD and we looked at something called stress hormones. These are something called glucocorticoid hormones. And lo and behold, both with the females and the males are a little more complex story. We find that elephants that are ranging outside the protected forest areas actually have lower levels of stress hormones compared to elephants that are ranging inside the national parks. Very interesting implications. And the reason for this is that elephants outside the forest are chased by the farmers. They can get injured. Therefore, you might expect that they have higher levels of stress. Yes, but the superior nutrition, the superior quantity of protein that they get outside kind of compensates for all the stress that they are undergoing. Therefore, they have lower levels of stress hormones when they are ranging outside the forest areas. Very, very interesting. And all this has been published by us recently.
Very interesting.
Okay. Now, Suresh, how much more time do I have?
About at least 15-20 minutes.
Oh, 15-20 minutes. Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is an argument that I put forth a long time ago in 1988 as a result of my PhD work. And this has to do with the, males and females in what we call a polygynous species. A polygynous species is one in which a male can mate with a number of females. And the elephant is one such polygynous society. You find that a female elephant, over its lifetime, it starts reproducing when it's about 15 years of age. and can go on until about 60 years of age. Okay. Typically, they produce about 6 calves, 7 calves, maybe 8 calves. There is not too much of difference, perhaps, among different females in elephant society in the number of calves that they produce. But when it comes to the male elephant, there is enormous variation. A male elephant has to be fit, it has to be in good body condition. It has to come into and express something called mast. Mast, we call it madam. Mast is an Urdu term. In this photograph, you see between the eye and the ear, you see a gland, and you see a moist patch here. Okay, the elephant is exuding a particular liquid, which is sending out chemical signals. During this period, it has very high levels of the male hormones, testosterone. It has dominance over other males which are not in mast. It attracts the attention of the females. It has a much better chance of mating. Therefore, the crop breeding, the higher levels of risks that the elephants take, the male elephants take. I found that the male elephant takes 5 times more risk in going and breeding crops compared to a female elephant. The females play it safe. The males are the risk-taking gender among elephants. And the explanation is that only a male which takes high risks potentially can gain, much more in terms of nutrition coming into mast and so on and so forth. And thereby it can increase its reproductive success over other competing males. Okay. Now, let me just take a step back and tell you a little bit about elephant society. Elephants live in families. They typically, a female and an offspring is the unit that you see on the top left. And below you see 2 elephants that are probably sisters and their offspring. Okay. This is a typical elephant family that I call, or what I call a joint family. And then in the picture below, you will see a slightly larger family, which is a bond group or a kin group. And 2 or 3 different families, 2 or 3 different sisters come together and they move along with their children, their offspring. But when it comes to the male elephant lives with the family only until the age of about 15 years. And then it has to leave the family. Otherwise, it will be doing what we call inbreeding. It will be mating with its own close relatives. Therefore, it's sent out to the family or leaves of its own accord. And then goes and then establishes its own home range away from its natal clan or natal family. And as it grows up, it matures, it comes into something called mast. The mast becomes more and more intense as the elephant grows larger and larger as it becomes older in age. So here you see a magnificent bull in mast. This is in Rajaji National Park in Uttarakhand. And you see in wonderful body condition. This bull has to be in good body condition to express mast. And then it roams around looking for females to mate with. And typically, no other male challenges a bull elephant in mast because it can get very badly injured in the process. So you can apply things like game theory in trying to explain when an elephant comes into mast, when an elephant goes out of mast, and other elephants should not express mast when you have a big dominant male coming into mast. And there's a whole lot of, just like economics, that you are familiar with. Game theory has been applied in elephant society about the spacing of mast, the duration of mast, the timing of mast in elephant society. Now, you come, so here is an elephant in Kaziranga, a tusker in mast, and it is a consort with a estrus female elephant. And Gajasastra describes this wonderfully. There is a single sentence in the Gajasastra, and there's this lore goes back to 2000 years that describes everything that we know about mast today. The changes in the physiology of the male, the fact that the male is fearless, he challenges every other male, the fact that the females are attracted, to the male in mast, and so on and so forth. It's only very, very recently, 30, 40 years ago, that biologists started understanding the significance of mast, which is actually there, a single sentence of Gajasastra. I have not quoted that here for the sake of, not getting into an elaborate discussion of this. Then among elephant societies, when these males leave and go, they have their own complex. So you have the professors and you have the students and the postdocs, So what are these students doing? So on this picture, you see on the left a male with a small tusk. He's being admonished by his professor, who's probably, So of giving him a knock, knock on his shoulder or head or whatever. Come on, come down a bit, whatever. And then there's probably the postdoc in the foreground. So these males, what they do when they disperse from their family, they have formed their own groupings. These are called bachelor males, bachelor groups. And they learn from each other. You have a hierarchy of these males. You have the professor, you have the postdoc, and you have the students who are learning from each other. And my student and I, we published a paper in a leading journal called All Male Groups in Asian Elephants, a novel adaptive social strategy in increasingly anthropogenic landscapes of southern India. And I'll just tell you what's happening. This is Tumkur. You go to Savandurga, you go to Tumkur, you go to all these areas. You have this agricultural landscape. You have coconut plantation in the background. Okay. And you have the maize fields and you have wonderful water in the village tanks in the foreground. And you see this herd. This is not an elephant family. It's not a typical elephant family. This is an all-male group with the professor, with the postdocs, and with the students. All the students are now ganged up. They are learning all the bad habits from the older males. They know how to then go and tackle the farmers. They are joining into these large groups. And what are they doing? They are raiding the crops at night. You get scenes like this, which are very common here. Elephants of different ages, starting from about 6 years of age up to about 50 years of age. You get the entire range of ages. And you see 1 or 2 males don't have tusks. These are tuskless males. They're not males, by the way. And during the daytime, so that the farmers can't come to them, they go to the center of the lake and they take refuge here, so that nobody can actually get to them. So during the elephants have changed their diurnal kind of, their behavior and habits. They're going and staying put during the whole 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 in the evening. They're taking refuge in the center of the lake. And by evening, they come out and they damage the crops. During the daytime, come dawn, and they take refuge in this large lake. So they are changing their behavior. They're adapting to landscapes that we have been changing. Okay, that is this wonderful, very complex pattern of changes in behavioral adaptations that the elephant society is undergoing. And they're learning from each other. Okay, this learning starts very young. You see this little calf putting its trunk into the mouth of a mother. This picture is taken 25 years, 30 years ago in Mudumalai. And the same kind of behavior may be perpetuated. So male sons from crop raiding families may perpetuate the habit of crop raiding. Because not all males go out and raid crops. It's only a section of males that go out and raid crops. Not all female elephants go out and raid crops. Many of them are content to be inside the forest area. So maybe daughters of well-behaved families that don't go and raid crops, be content with ranging inside the forest and feeding in the forest. So these are complex things that happen, and we can only speculate that this is a learning process that happens of socializing. Very quickly, let me go through this. This is an elephant that we put a GPS collar and we tracked the movement of this elephant almost 15 years ago in West Bengal. Our team has darted the elephant. We are fitting the radio collar. The elephant has got up. We collared it at a location called Rajabat Kawa, very close to Alipur Duar in Buxa Tiger Reserve, and in March. And this elephant is initially ranging within a forest area during the month of March when there is no crop. Okay, so it's only inside the forest. Now come April, come May, the maize crop starts maturing. So this elephant is now growing, showing directed movement towards crop fields where maize is found. And then in June, again, it shows the same behavior. By July, the crop is harvested, and by August, there's no crop anymore. The elephant comes back into the core area of the forest, just north of Rajabat Kawa, that yellow patch that you see there. Now, farmers start cultivating paddy. And in October, the paddy slowly starts growing and maturing. And the elephant now starts going from village to village in search of the paddy crop. And October 31st, the elephant is located here. You see this, the south of Rajabat Kawa, that village called Rajabat Kawa. That's why we named it Raja. To the east is Assam. And then suddenly makes a very rapid thrust. Just over a few days, it just makes a very rapid thrust into Assam. And then within 10 days, it comes back to the Buxa Tiger Reserve. Movement that we can pick up only because of the GPS collar on that we have installed on the elephant. Otherwise, we would not have known. He just made a rapid thrust of about 60 kilometers or 70 kilometers eastward and then came right back. It just did a very directional movement going and raiding crops in Assam. Maybe there's something very attractive there. This elephant died in a plane accident after the collar had stopped working. This is a female elephant called Dami. This is collared just north of NH31. Some of you may know this. Nepal is on the west here. Sukna, you may have known of. Siliguri is here. This elephant spends most of its year along with its family in this little patch of forest called Apalchand. Twice a year, it takes off and goes towards the Nepal border. It crosses over without a passport or a visa. It raids crops, comes back to the Indian side just for about 15 days because it finds the crops attractive. In May, June, July, the maize crop, and in November, December, the paddy crop. And then comes back to Apalchand. It's very food-seeking behavior. And in Javadi Hills, I told you about the 1980s. This is Bangalore and South Dharmapuri, Krishnagiri. You know all this, Tirupattur, Vellore. That is the herd of elephant which went there. It's got a huge forest area with a lot of water, 4,000 square kilometers of forest area. I always say this should have been the happiest elephant family in the world. One elephant family of 6 elephants plus 1 male, and it has a huge forest area, a big elephant kingdom. But still, the elephants were not satisfied. They were going and frequenting human habitation, coming out on the roads and seeking food from the truck drivers like this. And therefore, the elephants had to be captured, finally. Okay. So, I say that Lord Ganesha is ultimately a deity born out of conflict. Why am I saying this? You know, look at Ganesha, look at the broken tusk of Ganesha. How does an elephant break its tusks? A male elephant. Because it's in conflict with another male elephant. That's how it breaks its tusks. So Ganesha, with its pot belly, what's there in pot belly? You know, all those tons and tons of food, the paddy and the millets that it has gorged upon. So Ganesha is the ultimate deity that is born out of elephant conflict. And it represents, to me, it represents elephant-human conflict. But that's a different story altogether. How do you mitigate conflicts? How do you manage conflicts? It's a talk by itself, but I just put up a few slides for you. You know, you try to chase elephants, but you can be chased in the process. You see this? Yeah. It's years, you know, it's just turned back. It can just come back in a jiffy at the people chasing these elephants. Yeah, this is very close by here in the Hosur area. So it's very, very risky to chase elephants. I never believed that an elephant can perform, you know, circus feats like this. You know, the forest department, they dig these very deep trenches between the forest and the cultivated areas. But you can see how the elephant is clambering up. So you and I think that elephants should not perform in circuses. But you look at this elephant performing the circus feat. Yeah. And the elephants can overcome technology. All these electric fences. This is an elephant called Ranga. This operated very close to Bangalore near Bannerghatta. And it is crossing over from Bannerghatta outside, crossing the electric fence. Because it learns that the soles of the feet are poor conductors. Or it learns that the tusks are poor conductors and it overcomes all the technological innovation that we do. So it's an arms race between us and the elephant. We need to keep, you know, one up by constantly changing our design of the electric fence to prevent. And, you know, there is this hanging wire fence that seems to have some promise now, but again, there are no guarantees that you know, this can keep the elephants away. Okay, let me see what I have. We have early warning systems. We put a GPS collar and we can track the movement as I showed you. And we can warn the forest department can warn the villagers, but still somebody has to be courageous enough to go and chase that elephant away. Otherwise it's not. But I feel that something is inevitable. When conflict gets beyond control, when an elephant kills a number of people, there's no other option but to capture that elephant and take it to captivity and keep it there. And we have the long cultural tradition of keeping elephants in captivity. So some elephants of necessity will come into captivity and we will have to ensure their welfare in captivity. Well, finally, this is my last slide, that we have to plan for elephant conservation at the scale of landscapes. We have to do sensible landscape scale land use planning, make sure that the corridors are there for the elephants to move across these landscapes. And I had the fortune 30 years ago of trying to design some of these landscapes for launching Project Elephant between 1989 and 1992. The dark green is where essentially the elephants are found. You see these landscapes north of the Palghat Gap. You see 2 or 3 of these landscapes south of the Palghat Gap. These are the Project Elephant reserves. But today the concept has become a little more fuzzy as elephants are coming out. And very often people think 2 elephants come to Mysore town. If there's a corridor to Mysore, there's no corridor to Mysore. There's no corridor across large areas of Kodagu or Hassan where elephants are causing havoc in the coffee plantation area and killing people. So we have to bring what I would call a very kind of a sensible approach, where we have to be practical, we have to be pragmatic. By and large, manage the elephants inside these landscapes which can constitute Project Elephant reserves, and actively manage these elephants that are outside by capturing them, putting them back inside the forest, or if that's not going to work out in the long term, maybe keeping some of these in captivity. That's the only way that we can minimize, reduce elephant-human conflict. And I think we owe it to the farmers and the villagers in our country that we cannot allow this conflict to escalate to levels. It's already escalated beyond tolerable levels. Our farmers in India and Sri Lanka are among the most tolerant people I have ever seen, in the world when it comes to conflict with large-bodied animals like elephants. I have traveled extensively in Africa. I have traveled in Southeast Asia, and because of the cultural reverence of elephants, largely Hindu, Buddhist, but also other religions to a certain extent, we tolerate elephants. But in many other countries, the elephant would be considered a pest and it would be shot if it comes outside the national park. This has not yet happened in India and in Sri Lanka, by and large. But we need to reinforce the sense of cultural pride, but we need to provide relief to farmers by taking a very practical approach, by safeguarding their crops and human lives. Thank you. Thank you very much. I like to put up this wonderful sculpture from Mamalapuram. This is the most realistic elephant ever sculpted. This is actually more real than a real elephant. This is what in Sanskrit literature would be called the perfect Kumariya elephant. A barrel-shaped, robust elephant, extremely realistically carved by the Pallavas. And most historians of art seem to have missed out a small aspect of this sculpture. If you look between the eye and the ear, you see this little swelling on the rock, right? This little cup-shaped structure. The artist is trying to depict the elephant in must. So that catches the attention of a biologist and an elephant observer like myself. And to the best of my knowledge, no art historians have ever commented upon it. So this is a wonderful Kumariya elephant in must, and in consort with the female elephant, which is more than 40 or 50 years of age, with all the offspring gamboling, between the legs of this elephant. This is my favorite elephant sculpture of all times. Thank you.